Amy Lunardi, good to see you.
Good to see you. I haven't seen you in person for so long, Owen.
I know, it's been a while. I missed you.
Yeah.
You're looking well, though.
Yeah, and so are you for someone who has a very young baby.
Yeah. Like I said to you off air, that my brain isn't fully functioning just yet, but that I think is normal.
We've both got little boys called Charlie now.
Mm-hmm.
Great name.
Great name, yes. And soon to be great investors.
Tell me more. Yeah, I saw. I've been watching your investment journey for your son.
Yeah. So, I feel like they're both going to be property investors. I feel like they're both going to be.
They have no choice, do they?
They don't.
No.
Just investors in general, shares, all the things. Maybe even a bit of an entrepreneurial streak.
Is this what you're trying to, train?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's I think like the earlier you can start, the better. Just
I agree.
Immersing. I met this, just as a quick sidebar, I met this really amazing young man, I shouldn't say man, he's a boy, last week. And I asked him, why are you so interested in finance? And he's like, all of my parents' friends are business owners. And I was like, that's
How
really
old was he?
10.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, there's something. Just kind of get them like they're role models to be interested in this stuff.
That's right. Exposure without being forced, because when you're forced to do something as a child, then you don't want to do it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's cool. So today we're talking about 20 ways buying a property is like online dating.
We are. Although I think we'll only get through half today.
We'll do half
I reckon
today.
this is going to be a two-part series.
Two-parter. But when you proposed this, I think it was a lot of fun. And going through the 20, I've got them right here in front of me. They're all fun, but there is depth to them. So
there is depth.
Yeah.
I use analogies all the time when I'm helping clients. It's really helpful to put things into perspective. And I know that not necessarily everyone does online dating or has done online dating, but if you haven't done it before, either maybe you know someone who's done it, or you can just kind of picture what it would be like.
Yeah. I like it. So,
and we learn lessons through all of this. Like this is a fun episode, but each of these points, if you're someone who's bought a property before or you're in the market at the moment, you're probably going to relate.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of these lessons you'll be able to take away and learn from as well.
Yeah, I love it all because I've never been in this world. But
in the online dating world,
no. But my partner and I met very young, so. Not pre-internet for everyone that's listening, but it was early. And I do have friends, so I kind of live vicariously through them with their ups and downs. And so this makes a lot of sense to me.
I met my husband on Tinder.
Oh, really?
Yep. And a lot of my married friends have met their partners online.
Okay.
A lot. Yeah.
Okay. It's definitely like, there's a lot of data I could spread out about different companies around the world, like Match Group that does a lot of that, Tinder itself. So many companies that facilitate that, which is amazing. Okay, so let's get straight into it then. Number one, it's exhausting.
Well, if you're out there in the dating world at the moment, or perhaps you have been in the past, you might be exhausted because you are constantly making this effort. Well, if you're online dating, you're wanting to potentially get into a relationship, right? In the same way that if you're looking on realestate.com.au, it's because you're trying to buy a house, and it's easier said than done. It's an emotional process, both dating and both buying a property, because it's a commitment that you're trying to enter into, and it needs to be right for you. And you have these expectations, you get let down, you go on all of these dates, it's tiring. It's tiring and emotional.
It's like one big search. You're just constantly filtering through everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if you find someone and they're great, you're not guaranteed to end up in a relationship with them, same as property. Yeah. So this is something that you've got to understand before you go into it. And don't let that be something which deters you from continuing or makes you give up. Because if you give up, then nothing's going to happen. Same with dating. And I had friends that were dating for years and years and years until they finally found that person, and they were so tired.
Yeah.
Well, if you're buying a property, it shouldn't take you years though, because unlike dating, there is way more research that you can put into buying a property. You've got much more control over that process. But if you don't know what you're doing, or if you do take a lot of breaks because you find it so exhausting, and then of course it's going to stretch out longer. But unlike dating, you can do research and preparation, and you've got certain elements of control.
A lot of people do I don't know if the tired is the right word, but they do get worn down
Yeah.
by a property search.
Yeah. Well, Mon was telling me earlier that her sister, 2 years, she's just bought.
My friend.
Sorry, your friend? Yeah. Your friend's just bought a property after 2 years, and that would have been a very long time in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how long through you being a buyer's agent, how long does it typically take? Like, if you did it like an average of all the clients you've ever served, like how long would that typically be?
From commencement, when I say commencement, that's once we've got the brief in place, because the homework phase can take a while.
Okay.
From commencement, official searching to purchase, average 2 to 3 months.
Oh, right. It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. It's very rare to take longer than 6 months. Very, very rare. It's fine if it does with our clients, but it's very rare. And the fastest was same day. Sat down with a client. They told me their brief. I said, oh, I actually know a property that's perfect for you. Have you seen this? No. They went and saw it and they bought it on the same day.
Oh, wow.
But it's usually somewhere in between that.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. That's, I guess maybe if we bring it back to online dating, that maybe could happen. It could be the first one that you swipe on, or that you connect with.
Yeah.
You never know.
But just acknowledge that it is a tiring process. But the more prep work you put into it, the better outcome you're going to get, which you can't do with online dating, unfortunately.
True. But that is a perfect segue into the next one, which is finding, quote unquote, the one, which, we've all heard of this. You have the checklist of things that you're looking for, attributes, let's say, finding the one. That works for both online dating and property, right?
So this is an analogy that I find the most helpful, and I use this very, very commonly when I'm helping clients, because sometimes you do find that perfect property or that perfect person really soon in your search. Maybe you've just started online dating and you go on a date and that person is amazing and you think, oh, wow, this person's perfect for me. The same can happen with property. So you find a property really quickly. Maybe it's the first weekend you're out there inspecting. It ticks all of your boxes and you love it. So often I see buyers say, well, I love it, but I've just started looking.
Yeah.
What else is going to be out there? It's too soon. Like if I've already found a great one, that means that there's going to be more. So then my analogy that I use is I say, well, what if there's not? If you were online dating and if you were going on a date with someone and they were amazing, would you say, oh my gosh, I love the idea of this person, but I'm just going to see who else is out there?
You probably wouldn't, would you?
I don't think I would. I mean, I'm not going to.
But I hear that so much in property is like people do go out and they find something. They're like, wow. But then it's such a big purchase. I'll just see what else is going on.
That's right. Yeah. So this analogy is helpful because then when I say that to people, they say, yeah, you're right. Like it'd be kind of crazy to not at least explore this further. And this is a situation where doing homework beforehand is vital because it helps you then make that decision on whether that property is genuinely one worth considering. So the more homework you do beforehand and the more you figure out what your brief is, all of your priorities, you understand what's been selling over the last year. And that then allows you to benchmark this particular property against all of those other ones to say, how scarce is it? Is it in the top 3 of all of these other ones that have sold? And in which case that definitely warrants further consideration. Or is it kind of just somewhere in the middle and, this gives me hope that there is something else around the corner. You can't do that with online dating. You can't.
Yeah, you can't. I'm just trying to think. Yeah.
You can't benchmark that person. Like you don't have maybe as much context there. But you definitely can do that with property.
So when you said like the homework's important, right? Because then when you know.
It gives you two sides. So you've got that feeling that you're trying to create, you're looking at a property and you want that emotional connection. But then you've also, well, not everyone, but I think that backing that up with data is really helpful. So if you've done all the homework, and when I say homework, that's understanding, say, all of the properties that have sold in the last year that tick all of your boxes in the areas you're looking at, and having them maybe written down somewhere, maybe in a spreadsheet, and then you can use this property you found and just compare it against those ones. That's a really empowering process. I do it all the time with clients, and after they do it, they say, wow, that was really helpful in helping me make this decision. And a lot of them say, why didn't I think of doing this? It's really obvious once you sit down and do it, but no one does it.
Well, that makes sense why your kind of average time is like in, a couple of months, 3 months. because you're doing work at the beginning too to get to narrow that kind of like zoom in on what's important.
And that homework phase, Owen, some clients, we can do it in a couple of days or a week. And sometimes people take several months to do their homework because they really need to figure out what they truly want. Maybe they need to go and spend some more time in other suburbs and explore it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Getting led on is number 3. Getting led on. How do you get led on in property?
Well, a couple of ways, mostly through the real estate agents and the fun situation of underquoting.
Yes,
so,
of course.
And look, I just recorded yesterday an episode for my other podcast all about underquoting. It was a really hard episode for me to record because I needed to be fair because underquoting is a massive problem.
Yeah.
But not all agents do it purposefully, and it's such a difficult thing. It's rife in the industry, but you can get it led on by, well, when you're online dating, you can be thinking that it's going well, go on a few dates with someone and think they're really into you, and then all of a sudden they're not. You never had a chance. They were just
doing something else.
Their intentions were elsewhere. And it's the same with property. So you can be really interested in a property. You can think you can afford it because maybe you're focusing on the quote range, but in reality, perhaps that property was either underquoted because the agent, decided to underquote, or maybe the vendor's expectations were always above that quote range and you never had a chance. Agent can't control competition, and sometimes properties do sell for well beyond what they should or what comparable sales suggest. The agent doesn't really have as much control over that, but they do have control if the vendor said, hey, Owen, I want to sell, for $1 million and you quote it 900,000, then that's underquoting. And it wastes time. It wastes the buyer's time. It takes them out of the market. They waste their building inspection costs. They might miss out on other properties in the meantime they could have had a shot at. Yeah,
and it's disheartening because you're like...
So disheartening.
Yeah, you think that, I'm in this game. This is my pond that I'm going to fish in.
Yeah.
Then you find out in the fullness of time that maybe that's not realistic.
Yeah, and same with dating. You might be dating someone for ages thinking, they're committed to me.
Yeah.
And then they're actually not. And in the meantime, you've missed out on meeting other people.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that relates to this. That relates to this next one, which is it's a numbers game.
Yes. Yeah. So not always. Remember, like what we said just before, sometimes you do find the one really quickly, but other times it really is a numbers game. And the more dates that you go on, the more chance you have of finding that right person.
Yep.
So you can't be maybe too picky at the start because you need the numbers. And this is particularly important in your research phase. The more properties that you can inspect and attend and auctions you go to and just be immersed in that property market, just the more context you'll have and exposure later on so that when you're ready to buy, and the right one comes up, you can say, okay, well, I've actually seen 10 others and this is the best one. That's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
So, the more you get out there, put yourself on the market, for lack of a better phrase, the more experience you have and hopefully that'll then empower you in your decision making.
It's interesting. I remember looking years ago at a company called the Match Group. This is a big US company that owns many of the websites that were traditional like dating websites and before Tinder came along basically. And they threw out this crazy study, this was just before COVID, of like 1 in 3 Americans or 1 in 4 were meeting online. As in, like, they later got married or something. It was huge. And I was, like, blown away by this. But it is so much easier to do that rather than the old school method of meet through a friend, happen across each other at a bar. That type of method. Like, and that relates to this point of, like, it's a numbers game. Yeah.
Exactly. And you actually need to think of it as, like, once you start searching for a property, you need to allocate every Saturday as your game day. That's the day you're going out inspecting properties. Maybe if you're online dating, you're allocating every Friday night to going on a date. I don't know. Maybe
There's
people do that. There's a tip.
Yeah.
But it really is prioritizing this and saying, okay, I need to do this as much as this is my priority. I need to get to as many inspections as I can. I need to get out there on the ground as much as possible to be able to then have that confidence, especially if you're someone that really needs like more data and more context. Other people just go with their feeling, and that's fine as well if you prefer that. But I just think the more information you have when you're ready to officially buy, the better you'll be prepared.
For sure. And that relates to this next one. Another way that property is like online dating is it can take a few dates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need to take a few dates just to get to know someone before you go to the next level.
And it's not always love at first sight, which is what a lot of people think they need to have that feeling when they first start dating someone. They need to have that connection straight away, and I have to have this person on the first date. And they think they have to have that with property too. They feel like they need to walk through something and it needs to feel right. Yeah. And that's rarely the case. It's rarely the case because sometimes a property might be perfect for someone, but it's terribly styled or presented or messy or, for whatever reason, the tenant is, following you around and making you feel awkward, and that overshadows the fundamentals of that property. So it can take a few dates. And my husband doesn't listen to this podcast, so he's not going to care if I tell this story, but we had to go on several dates before we decided that there was something there, because at the start we didn't have that instant connection, but the boxes were ticked.
Yeah.
They ticked the boxes. And we're like, oh, we kept at it. Yeah. And now 10 years later,
Here we are.
So this is why we have to have a property brief, where we have our budget, our locations, our non-negotiables, and our bonuses. And if that property is ticking all of those boxes, maybe give it another chance. Yeah. Go back for a second inspection or a third inspection. Or a second date or a third date. But it's so fascinating with property because a lot of people will look at a property for less time than they'll go and try on some new jeans in the store before deciding to buy it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you actually only have one opportunity to see a property. And in which case, then, because it might be selling quickly, or you might have seen it, the week before the auction, ask the agent if you can take a video so that you can refer back to that, because you might be feeling like pressured or rushed or whatever. Can't do that on a date. You can't say, can I record this conversation for later research purposes?
Just take a video. Walk through. Which is a very good tip for anyone that is inspecting a property, by the way. I did that.
You took a video?
Yeah, videoed a lot of spots. I think you told me, it's polite to ask.
You have to. You have to ask. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't. It's not a rule. I would strongly recommend asking. It's rare that they'll say no. Or if there's a tenant in there, I'm just super nice to the tenant and I'll say, look, this is just for personal.
Yeah, because they could have photos of family and friends, and they could have personal stuff around. So it's reasonable, yeah.
And I did have a client not long ago who we did look at a property. It was tenanted and the client didn't feel comfortable enough to take a video. And then later on, they were like, oh, we wish we did, because there's certain parts of that property we're just not sure about and we want to refer back to. Yeah. And we couldn't get back in easily. So
yeah. You know what? When you said you and your partner, the kind of not persevering, maybe that's a strong phrase, but persevering,
giving it a shot.
Dates. Giving it a shot. Yeah. And you mentioned different things. This next one is identify your deal breakers. And I was just trying to think, because my mind's wandering at the moment. It's wonder what the deal breakers would be. You don't have to share, but I was just for property, it's pretty obvious, right? We all have that property brief. Yeah. Or at least we should.
Yeah.
And so it's a pretty quick kind of once over, right? It's a quick way to swipe left or right on the property.
Exactly. So when you're creating your property brief, you've got to have your own, I call them minimum standards.
Okay.
They're basically not your non-negotiables. So what must this property have as a minimum for me to consider it? And then what are the things that might be deal breakers? So for you, it might be I don't want to live opposite a train line. That's a deal breaker for me. Or I don't want to do structural renovations. That's a deal breaker for me. It's really good to understand what you do want, but also what you don't want before you do all of this. And what that then helps you is to not then get swayed by beautifully renovated properties or beautiful styling or elements which make you feel a certain way, but they're really not ticking enough of your boxes, or they might have elements which should be deal breakers for you, but you haven't thought about it beforehand. And how this relates to online dating is you might meet someone and they're very attractive.
Yeah.
You feel physically, emotionally drawn to them because they're very attractive, but then they might have certain, personality traits or values which are deal breakers for you, but you're kind of glossing over them because
they're not husband, wife material, partner material long term. So
I think that when you're younger as well, maybe you're more forgivable with these kind of things. But when you're older and maybe you want to settle down, have a family soonish, those values become more important. So it's figuring out what you really need beforehand. And I think that comes with maturity and time.
Definitely.
As well. With my ex-boyfriends, there were certain things that we just deep to our core didn't agree on, and they ended up being deal breakers.
Yeah.
And then I knew that moving into the next relationships from there.
And that relates to the next one, which is evolving preferences.
There you go.
Which can come, as you said, through experience and those types of things. But it can also come through the context of having looked at other things.
Exactly.
Then you realize some things aren't as important, I'm guessing.
Always. Yeah. So you can do as much homework at the start to figure out what your brief is. But as you start going on dates or as you start going to property inspections, you realize what you truly want might be a little bit different. And I think it's important here to not then hold on to those original values and say, well, no, that's something that I wrote down as my brief. I have to stick to it. Allow change and be okay and be open to it. And because I've got a lot of clients who might say at the very beginning, I must be walking distance to a train station. And I always test them at the start politely but firmly. Say, is it absolutely a deal breaker? Yes, I have to be walking distance. And then all of a sudden a beautiful property which they love will come up and it's not walking distance to a station. They'll say, look, you know what, to have this property, I'd probably just drive to the station or I'd buy a scooter. Yeah. And that's okay. But it then helps you to really test your own non-negotiables and your deal breakers. You try to do that as much at the start as possible, but it's not always possible. Yeah. You learn a lot about yourself through dating and through buying a property.
I think it's not just for first-time buyers either. That's just in general.
Oh, absolutely.
Like further in through life, things change and, your needs for a property change. Some people have big 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom houses and then kids are gone, preferences change, right? I'm happy now with an apartment or a townhouse or something like that, single level like that. It all just changes, right? So that's really important. And it can change. I felt this with buying our first property. I felt that it could change pretty quick. Yeah. Like what we thought immediately was important to us was not that important. We did the brief, but that was a quick kind of check, like a sense check on what wasn't important.
And it's really hard to predict what your future self will want and need. When we bought the current house that we live in, we bought that a long time ago, but I was really averse to moving out into the suburbs. I'm an inner city person. I love it. And I didn't feel like I would ever be that person. Yeah. But I changed. Yeah. Had kids, changed preferences. And now I really love it and I couldn't picture not being there. But it's so hard to know what your future self will want. And therefore, we always say, ideally, you're planning for at least the next 5-ish years, but planning for a 10 to 15 or forever property, especially if you're, say, in your 20s or even your 30s, that's really hard. And I'll have a lot of clients who will have a newborn baby or not even have a baby yet, and they're already talking about getting into a certain high school zone. And of course, I'm going to respect that if that's a strong priority for them. But I say between now and the next 13, 14, 15 years, your life might look completely different. So buying into a school zone for that opportunity, if you're then compromising on other elements on your brief and your livability now, is that worthwhile? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Nobody is perfect, Amy.
Nobody's perfect, Owen.
Number 8 on the list.
Look, I think that's fair to say with humans, right? Yeah. Nobody's perfect. You can find someone who's amazing. They're not going to necessarily tick every box. They're going to have flaws. We all have flaws. And it's the same with property. If you are striving to find the perfect property, you're going to let yourself down. Yeah. It's very rare to find a 10 out of 10. I have had a couple of clients over the years where like, this is a 11 out of 10. I absolutely love it. I have to have it. It's pretty rare. We're aiming for an 8. I think that's like a fair thing.
An 8.
Yeah, okay, I know that's really arbitrary, but.
No, but it kind of makes sense. Yeah. I think that's something for people to kind of wrap their head around. It's like, I'm aiming for an 8 out of 10. That's pretty good.
And your 8 can be, whatever you decide to score as an 8, but it's really saying what first of all, it has to tick all of your non-negotiable boxes. Otherwise, it's not even allowed on the list. But then from there, you can use your bonus boxes to then score it however you want to score it. Emotional feel, if you're not an investor, like if you're a home buyer, you have to have a bit of emotion there. And you might really sit down and say, what am I ranking this property if I really had to give it a number?
Yeah.
And if it's a 6, well, I think maybe you can do better. If it's a 9, go for it. But just acknowledging that there's no perfect property.
Yeah.
So I had a
I don't know, I reckon Travis Fimmel's pretty close to perfect man.
Should I know who this is?
He's an Australian actor.
Hold on, I've got to Google this.
He's the guy from Vikings.
How do I spell it? Travis.
Yeah, I'm looking at Monique. Travis Fimmel, Fimmel.
Oh, yes. Yep. Look, I'll agree with you there.
Yeah.
But you've never met him.
Yeah,
so,
no, don't know. But hopefully. But I was thinking about this. Like, actually, that 8 out of 10 is really interesting because you have the context of working with so many clients through buyer's advocacy, right? Mm-hmm. I don't. So I don't know if my kind of thinking is normal. But like, I walk around my house and I'm like, it's not exactly what I want, but is it good? Yeah. It's probably an 8 out of 10 when I think about it. Like, does it have something that I want? Yeah. Is it a pain? Yeah. But it's still pretty bloody good.
Yeah.
So that actually brings me a bit of comfort to know that, I'm probably not the only one that, we'd always kind of want to creep a little bit, but yeah, that's cool.
I was doing some homework with a client recently and I say to them, you write down your brief and then send me ideally, 6 to 10 examples of properties that have sold that tick all of these boxes that have sold within budget in the last 8 months. So on average, 1 a month. Mm-hmm. And that, if you can find 1 a month on average that's sold, that demonstrates to you that your brief should be achievable, ignoring any market changes. If you can only find 1 or 2, then you're probably being too fussy and something needs to change. And if you can find 20, you're not being fussy enough.
Yeah.
It's really broad numbers. But this client sent me their homework and they said, we could only find 2 that have sold in the last 7 months that we think tick all the boxes are perfect. And I said, okay, decision number 1, are you buying a property, yes or no? Yes, we have to buy a property. We've outgrown our current property. I say, okay, well, we've got to figure out of all of these elements in your brief, what do we need to change to make sure this is achievable? It's going to be suburbs, distance from train, number of bedrooms, condition of property.
Yeah.
You got to sit down and say, which one of these out of all of them would I compromise on? I think compromise is a bit of a dirty negative word in property, but was, what would you be willing to flex a little bit on to then prioritize these other things? And we really did a lot of soul searching on that, and they ended up then saying, okay, well, we would consider a little bit further from a station. And all of a sudden there were 6 examples instead of 2 that ticked those boxes. So yes, they weren't perfect in their opinion because they weren't walking distance to the station, but they were still an 8 out of 10 because that was the forgivable element of the brief.
Just a quick one on this. Not at all like online dating, so I don't even know if there's an analogy here. But what would you say in dealing with all your clients is kind of the preferred distance from a station? Because some people want to be like me. I want to be close enough to a station, either for myself, my partner, or future kids, but I don't want to be so close that my windows rattle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, I feel like that's kind of a normal kind of ideal for people. But like in your experience, like, is that what people tend to say?
A lot of people, well, if someone works in the city and they're commuting every single day, they want the opportunity. A lot of them want the opportunity to be able to walk.
Yep.
But in reality, a lot of people work from home these days. A lot of people who are out in the suburbs, there's plenty of parking near stations.
They're all improving. Yeah.
Even if it's not at the station, a couple of streets away, you've generally got non-permitted parking.
Yeah.
So even though it's annoying to have 1 extra step in the morning to get into the car and then drive for 2 minutes and then walk 200 meters, that's often more tolerable than being closer in and having a smaller property. And then some people don't have cars, for example. But I say in Melbourne, are you really walking every day, especially in winter?
Yeah.
It's often raining.
Yeah, it's cold.
Are you still walking in the rain?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'd probably drive anyway. Okay, well, why not drive those other days?
Yeah,
so
go an extra kilometre or 2,
Yeah. We test it. We test the non-negotiables. I had a client recently. Non-negotiable was 2 toilets. And that's one I always test. Okay, what if the dream property came up and only had 1 toilet? Would you look at it? Yes. That's not a non-negotiable. But this client was firm. If it didn't have 2 toilets, they didn't even want me to send it to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so figure out your absolute.
Some people need 2 toilets. Number 9 is beware of being catfished. Now, I'm going to break the wall again because Monique used to be a big fan of Catfish. Monique, our podcast manager over here.
The movie?
The series.
The series. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know there was a series.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah, people get catfished. First of all, what is catfishing? That's probably the first thing to keep in mind. So maybe what is catfishing?
Well, catfishing is where, what you think you're going to get, you're not actually getting. So with online dating, maybe it's a photo of that person from 10 years ago. Yeah. Or maybe it's not even them at all.
Yeah.
Which is them with a filter on.
Which is everyone that's ever looked at a realestate.com.au or domain has clicked on a photo like, hold on a second, this is like a filter, AI, something's going on here. This color does not make sense.
I've seen so many Photoshop fails as well where they've like Photoshopped the color of the grass and accidentally changed the tree colors.
Yeah.
Clearly obvious.
Yeah.
They use wide-angled photography. They use digital furniture these days.
Right. Okay. Rather than pay to furnish it or whatever.
Correct. Yeah. They brighten spaces up. There's so many things they can do with an online listing so that when you get there, or maybe they don't put dimensions on a floor plan. So what looks like 3 bedrooms is really 2 plus a study.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you get there and you're like, oh, this is just not what I expected.
Yeah.
So this is where you just have to, I guess, start being critical of and acknowledge that this happens.
Yeah.
And do a little bit of your own research. So I would say go on Google Maps, just do a little street view, what's on that street. Plenty of people, I think, go to property inspections. All of a sudden they get there and there's like a factory over the road or something they didn't think about. You don't want to waste your time.
Yeah, Google Maps. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, or just learning over time. I can look at a floor plan. I'm so good at reading floor plans now. But quite often I'll say to someone, well, didn't you notice the laundry was outside? Oh, I didn't notice that in the floor plan.
Yeah.
And that's a deal breaker for them. So there's a balance here. You want to not be so critical that you just don't go at all.
Yeah.
But you want to just identify any red flags before you waste your own time, because that comes back to the whole point of being exhausting. If you're going to all these inspections, going on all these dates with people who aren't suitable at all, like before you go on a date with someone, if they live in, 400 kilometers away.
Yeah, I don't want long distance.
Yeah, you don't want long distance. Maybe don't catch up with them.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's interesting because like even when you get to places, you're like, oh, this is. I remember talking about this in the free property course that we did. It's not necessarily like a deal breaker, but it was definitely something that I was like, just things you pick up on over time. Like putting rugs over the broken floorboards. That happened like 3 times in our house.
Yeah.
And I was just like, surely no one's going to do that, But you just can't take it for granted. They did it. It's not full catfish moment, but it was just like, I didn't feel I needed to check on that thing, but now I know that that's a thing that I need to check.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so lucky number 10 for the first part of our mini series on reasons why properties like online dating is don't ignore the red flags. Seems pretty obvious, but what do you mean?
Well, I'm sure there are plenty of people listening to this who have been on dates with someone where there's been a red flag at some point in time, and that's been the reason why they've continued to not date them. Maybe that was just something to do with their personality, or I don't know, preferences, or maybe all of a sudden you found out they're already in another relationship. Well, that's a red flag for most people.
Yeah.
But I'm sure for many reasons also sometimes people ignore the red flags at the start because maybe they are
definitely
physically attracted to that person, or they're getting a bit desperate and they say, well, that's fine, I'm going to just gloss over that. Or maybe there's a lot of things that seem at the start like, oh, it's not quite right, it's not quite right, not quite right. And to you, you're kind of downplaying it. But then as soon as you speak to one of your friends, they will say to you, Owen, red flag, move along. They're looking at it impartially.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking the friends and the family come through and they're like, oh.
Yeah, so, and that's the same with property too. So there might be red flags at the beginning, it might be something which is not correlating with your non-negotiables and your deal breakers. That's a red flag at the start. It might be something like major problems with the owner's corporation. It might be the zoning for that property. It might be problems with the building inspection. And you just then need to figure out like what for me defines something that I then walk away from.
Yep.
Because just for some people, they're more tolerant of structural issues or water issues or problems with a building inspection than other people. But if you're emotionally into a property, and I guess one great case study was this is not so much red flags, it's more just a misalignment with the brief. I had a client, they had said they had little kids, they must have a kitchen which looked into the backyard so they could monitor and keep an eye on the kids.
Common. Yep.
And that was a non-negotiable for them. And then they sent me a property which was not only the kitchen didn't look onto the yard, but it backed onto the creek and the yard was full of snakes. Yeah. And they just couldn't get past. They loved this property so much, but they couldn't, like, I kept saying to them, but this is totally, these are red flags for me. These are against your goals. And the emotion for them was, it's really hard to move past that. Yeah. So you need to, identify it and say, what then, at what point, what's my breaking point? What then do I need to move on from? And this might be then talking to other people, having a buyer's agent, having a partner or a third party, a friend to say, am I being crazy here?
Yeah. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Like the red flags thing. I was just thinking about all the friends and family members that have gone into relationships and you're like, I can see it, but you can't.
I can agree with that. Yeah, I've known a few.
But then in property, I feel like one of the inspections that I'm thinking back to now, there were definite red flags and we were this close to putting in an offer.
Yeah.
Like there was this one property we looked at, which was a bigger block than we have now and da-da-da-da-da. And it looked great, but then it was like, oh, there's a gigantic easement that goes straight through the block, so it can't do anything there. And then
couldn't extend onto that.
Yeah.
And, couldn't subdivide.
Yeah, and then at the front, there was a steep road that comes straight down into the property. I'm like, that's a risk. If you have kids, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night, So, but we were so close, and it probably was up to our in-laws, actually, who I could probably thank for this, to be like, not a good idea. Like, there's a red flag here. This is what it is. So just getting that, like in your case, that's what you do for a lot of your clients. You're like, hold on a second, this is not what you said.
And I guess to finish on this point, this demonstrates the importance of doing due diligence beforehand, because unless you identify a red flag, you're not going to know about it.
Yeah.
And I was at an auction 2 weeks ago, and there were 2 people that rocked up to that auction. They had seen the property for the first time that day. Mm-hmm. They hadn't done a contract review, obviously. They just rocked up. They hadn't done a building inspection.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know what red flags were at that property.
Yeah.
So unless you do all of this prep work beforehand, find out if there's a big development going on nearby, understand what the zoning is there flood over, understand what you're buying so you can identify the red flags and decide if they're a deal breaker, rather than buying and finding out the red flag later on.
So we're going to come back for number 2 in this mini series of 20 ways buying properties like online dating. But I want to end with a question to you about your business. Now, obviously, we're recording this here in Melbourne. Who are the types of clients that you serve, and where are they buying?
Okay, so we buy for both owner-occupiers and investors. Mm-hmm. And I find the split of that is very variable over the years. Like when we're in really strong markets, we have a lot more investors buying into Melbourne. Yep. Melbourne's been a bit on the nose for the last few years for investors. It's been very sluggish. And since the rate cut earlier this year, I've had significantly more investors. And
people are just turning around and be like, well, Melbourne actually, relative to other cities, is seems like a pretty good place to invest.
Well, it was last year too. Last year when it was at the depth of its cycle, that was the time to invest. But, the property and especially investing, it's all about the bandwagon, and now absolutely. Melbourne's picked up, everyone sees it. Yeah. Oh, the fundamentals haven't changed though. It's just that we've had a rate cut and sentiment's improved. But, as a buyer's agent, I work in sort of the middle ring of Melbourne, northeast, south and west, 15 to 20 Ks out circa. But a lot more investors at the moment. But home buyers, downsizers, first home buyers, sideways buyers.
Upgraders, side graders.
Okay. No specific, niche of person or price point as well.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I'll put a link in the podcast player, of course, and people can get in contact with you in multiple ways. So that will all be available there if you want to work with Amy. I think that Melbourne, I was saying to Pete and Chris the other day, that I think that Melbourne's I feel like it's neglected, at least on a national scale, like as buyers across the country look around. There's been a lot of attention to Perth, obviously, over the past 3 years.
Perth has a lot of up and down swings.
Brisbane before that, and still now.
Yeah, still now from Brisbane.
Yeah. But Melbourne's there's so many great pockets in Melbourne. I just think people need to pay more attention. And that's just not me. That's not just it's my home bias kind of thing. It's just legit. I was chatting to a guy from Sydney who's buying in Melbourne. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense.
I've got a lot of Sydney investors at the moment.
Yeah.
That being said, I do think there's a perception for some reason that Melbourne is significantly cheaper, and it's not. I've got a lot of people who inquire and say, I want to buy a 3-bedroom home and a full block for 600 to 700. And it is possible much further out, but
than they realise.
Not in areas that we cover.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, well, we'll come back for part 2. Amy Lunardi, an absolute pleasure to have you in the studio. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Owen.
Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you want to hear more from us, you can get daily videos and podcasts on Rask's YouTube channel, or if you want to enroll in a free course on investing, property, business, money, you name it, you can join over 34,000 other students and enroll in a free course on the Rask website. Simply head to www.rask.com.au and follow the prompts. Thanks for watching this Rask podcast.